We're also joined from Bogota by Ivan Briscoe, Crisis Group Program Director for Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you for joining us here on France 24.
Thank you very much.
I'll begin with you, Rob. Your reaction to the images we saw of that concert.
Well, they've been talking about getting 250,000. It's impossible, of course, to judge from a television screen just how many people are there, but it looks massive. And they're hoping to raise an equally colossal $100 million for aid to Venezuela through this concert. That's a huge sum to raise. But certainly, judging by what we've seen in the images there, the momentum does seem to be behind this attempt to raise aid for Venezuela.
Ivan Briscoe, we heard Richard Branson saying that this basically all started 3 weeks ago when he watched Juan Guaido speaking on television. What do you think about when you see those images of this concert?
Well, I mean, they're very impressive images. There's obviously a huge number of people who are backing Juan Guaido's attempt to topple Maduro and restore full democracy in Venezuela, people in Venezuela and people outside Venezuela. But the concern for Crisis Group and for many people at the moment is that this humanitarian aid is not a traditional humanitarian effort based on providing assistance, emergency provisions to those who most need it. It is effectively part of a political mission to change power in Venezuela. And we have seen that very clearly. The U.S. backing for this humanitarian enterprise, the backing from Colombia and from other countries in Latin America has come intimately linked with the attempt to force Maduro from power and to bring about new elections in Venezuela.
So for you, Richard Branson is effectively leading a political rally?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that there are huge humanitarian needs in Venezuela. Let's not have any doubt about that. We know that 90% of Venezuelans are in poverty, that the average weight loss of Venezuelans is of several kilos in recent years, that there are shortages of food, shortages of medicine, that the health system is in disrepair. So no one is denying that the humanitarian relief is absolutely required. But this comes within a broader political context. Let's be very clear. The US and other Latin American countries and European countries have backed Guaido's claim to the presidency. And following on from that, the United States banned proceeds from Venezuelan oil sales in the United States going to the Venezuelan government. Now, that was the main base, the main resource which the Venezuelan government used to buy food rations for its people. It was distributing food rations to 7 million households in Venezuela. It will find it very difficult to do so now following those sanctions. So in some ways, I think for the Venezuelan government, but maybe for some outside observers as well, it's this humanitarian relief comes against a background in which the vital resources for the Venezuelan government have actually been denied them. So it is part of a political battle. It's not free of a broader political mission, as I said, which is to remove Maduro from power.
And part of this showdown is what's going to happen on Saturday. Saturday is when Venezuela's opposition has vowed to move in humanitarian aid, and we have dueling heads of state, each with their own cabinet and envoys. France 24's Mark Perlman sat down with Carlos Vecchio. He's Juan Guaido's ambassador to the United States. He asked Vecchio about the closing of Venezuela's border with Brazil and the potential that Nicolas Maduro might do the same with Colombia. Let's listen.
We will have different point of entrance, and this is not a one single event. I mean, we want to continue doing this in the days to come. So that will create momentum for us. And at the same time, we are calling for demonstrations, not only in the borders with Brazil and Colombia, but also in the rest of the country. So you will see a lot of movement in the days to come that will create important events in Venezuela that will, facilitate, in our view, not only the entrance of the food and medicine, but also, to push harder on the transition in our country.
Ivan Briscoe, what's your reaction when you hear Juan Guaido's envoy to the U.S. there promise a lot of movement in the days to come?
Well, clearly that's the intention. We are seeing this build-up in Cucuta. We don't know quite what's going to happen tomorrow. A lot of it is going to be based on the presence of Juan Guaido and his supporters on the Venezuelan side of the border, trying to bring that aid in from Colombia. But their movements are being restricted. Obviously, there's a very heavy Venezuelan security presence on that side of the border. We know that the Venezuelan government doesn't want to have a military entanglement. They don't want to get involved with the Colombian military, but they will police and repress the Venezuelans arriving in an effort to receive aid on their side of the border. So the possibilities for violence are very high. And we've already seen violence just earlier today on the Brazilian border with Venezuela, including the killing of an indigenous person, apparently. So the potential for a conflagration is high. It may be chaotic, and that will have to be avoided at all costs. Clearly, the government in Caracas regards this humanitarian mission as a means or an excuse or a ploy for military intervention in their country. That's what they see. Whereas Guaido and his supporters see this as a humanitarian mission with the political goal of weakening military and support for Nicolas Maduro. So we're effectively seeing two sides coming together, facing one another across a border, and we don't quite know what the results will be.
Your reaction to what Anna's reporting on, of course, a second fatality, first of all, at that border with Brazil, and also the idea that there is this tension, but we haven't seen full-blown violence yet.
No, we haven't. And we haven't seen violence in public over the last month, although there have been continuing killings, alas, by Venezuelan security forces working for Maduro in some of the poorer barrios of the country against, the uprisings against his rule. But it's clearly worrying. In the Brazil and the Venezuelan border with Brazil, there have been long-standing tensions between the Pemon indigenous peoples and the National Guard, who are regarded as an oppressive force. So, that is understandable, and that sort of violence has been going on for some time. The real question, the real danger, is on the Colombian border. Now, if Maduro were to decide to close the border, and he's done this before, he did this in 2015, the risks are immense. Why? Because there's a daily flow of migrants and people coming to and fro across the border of about 50,000 people moving over close to Cucuta on the Colombian side, and 3,000 or 4,000 of them are actually leaving Venezuela for good. They're emigrants, they're refugees. Now, if that border is closed, what is going to happen to those people? And many of these people, if not most, are flowing away from the extreme conditions of economic distress and depression in the country. So they're still going to leave, but how? Well, they'll probably cross illegal border crossings, and that's where it gets very worrying, because those illegal border crossings are used by many of the armed groups and the criminal groups in the area for their contraband trafficking of fuel and of coca and of cocaine. So these are concerns. I think it would be very worrying if Maduro closed the border once again with Colombia. I believe that Russia has established alliances with a number of countries in Latin America in recent years, Venezuela foremost, but also with Nicaragua and Bolivia and, of course, Cuba. And it doesn't want to let these alliances drift and die. But it's not been willing to pump in a lot of fresh money into Caracas, which is what really the government of Maduro needs. And I regard it as very unlikely that it would take part in a military escalation and actually commit military assets to the defense of Maduro. But it will continue to support the regime, facilitate its survival, help trying to sell its oil, provide grain and other emergency lifelines if necessary, and will not let it fall. I think the Russians might be thinking, why not let the United States get bogged down in Venezuela and see what happens?
All right, many thanks, Ivan Briscoe of Crisis Group, for joining us from Bogota. I want to thank